go to the players round, where we step to the other side of the screen and discuss things that affect the players. I thought the good topic to bring up kind of really links in with what Dan was talking about in the DM's table. But as the players take that next step, I mean, we've been discussing things like how to create a compelling character, or how to, how we come up with our concepts. But now we discuss, how do we take that next first step, and how do we properly engage in roleplay? I mean, many of you may already be long-time players, so this no longer becomes an issue. I know for all of us, we've been playing 10 years max, so we're well and truly versed in roleplay, but we weren't that way once. Once we were our first time at a table and we're asking to roleplay. And fundamentally, how do we engage in it? How do we finally get over that first hurdle, that first bout of awkwardness that comes from sitting around a D&D table and finally becoming the character that you have created?
Yeah.
I can always remember my first sort of session. It was a feng shui game, and I joined in with some people who've been playing for quite a while, so they understood roleplay, and I've never done it before. I think I was in my sort of like late teens, and I'm completely clueless on what to do, and it was trying to find that moment to jump in, and you feel so silly doing it sometimes, but then before long I joined your campaign, Dan, and again there was that moment. Then suddenly, once I knew who group was, you couldn't shut me up.
Nope.
But how did you each... I mean, what were your first experiences with roleplay, and how did you overcome them? Like, what was the bit that made you sit there and be like, oh, I get it?
I think when I first started, I didn't really have much of an issue with the roleplay. I was like, I have a character, they've got a voice, it's going to be this silly Irish voice, and they're a half-elf, and then... that was pretty much me gone, and I've kind of just gotten more and more used to role-playing since then. So I didn't really have much of a ledge to jump off on. I was kind of at ease, and it was at one point where I was making a speech for it was a funeral speech for one of the characters. And here's the thing: Dan and I used to play in a pub, and we were in the front room, in the front room of the pub, and there was the landlord, at the bar serving beer to all these old timers, and I had to stand up and make this speech for this character that just died in front of all these people drinking beer, and I just went with it, and I owned it, and it was, and that, I think after that I was like, okay, it's fine, I'll take everything, I'm okay with it now.
That is trial by fire.
Yeah, that was early-ish days, and ever since then I'm like, I don't mind.
I mean, after that, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
What about you, Dan?
I mean, my very, 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 very first D&D character was a 3.5 edition Dwarf Paladin. It was, D&D was introduced to me, and at that point in my life I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft. I already knew that dwarfs were my thing, and I really kind of liked the idea and the theme behind Paladin, so created that. And in terms of like how I played that character, I just kind of drew on all of my experiences of dwarves up until that point. So at that point in time, it was World of Warcraft and the Lord of the Rings films, and so on and so forth. And I mean, what came out was a relatively cliche grab bag of everything. It was basically Gimli. And I'll admit that my very first action as a D&D player was I was washed up on a beach. For some reason, the DM decided that my dwarf was stark naked, and one of the other players' wizards kind of was kneeling down to help me up, and my dwarf woke up and chose violence. And
many red flags in this first session here.
Yeah, headbutted the wizard and demanded to know why I was naked. Like, I found comfort and confidence from kind of drawing in from those outside influences. And to be fair, like, a lot of things that I drew on back then are still things I draw on now. It's good. You can get inspiration from anywhere, right? It doesn't have to be like fantasy stuff or sci-fi stuff if you're playing a sci-fi, but the more things you see, the more things you take in, the more things you can then, in inverted commas, regurgitate, and you've seen it work once, right? So when you do it, it's probably going to work as well. Yeah, that's how I tackle it.
Birdie?
I would say that, I had this turning point when I started DMing myself. So it was most involvement of my roleplay aspects, because at this point, I knew what I am allowed to do. I get a scheme about what I'm allowed to do, to take, what's obviously in the room. I didn't have time to ask, is there a beer bottle on the table or something like this. I just grabbed the bottle because it's logical that there is a bottle on the table.
Yeah.
This was for me the major point where I experienced more roleplay. And another thing was when I started to create characters with a more deeper background, and that got more inspired by realistic characters, film characters. For sci-fi settings, I have chosen Krieger from the Archer series. It was very funny.
I'm seeing a theme here, yes.
Yeah. And it really helped me going along with something I have aligned to, a guideline. I could easily imagine how would this character act in this situation and just doing his phrases.
Okay, that makes sense. So you take, I think that's kind of similar to what Dan said. It's like, take like a similar character / trope site, and then just kind of copy that and follow that until you get more comfortable with different things.
Yeah, totally.
Which I think is absolutely not what I did. but on that point, the quality of my role playing has improved. So it wasn't the first element of having the courage to do it, but it's over time the quality of what I had to say has improved.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys have the same thing, but over time you get more at ease. But it's also, you've got more interesting things to say as you create better characters.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for myself. I've mentioned Group in the past. Oh, he started off as this absolute moron of a character because he was just meant to be the barbarian. But as time went on, the story got deeper and richer. He, as a self, became richer and deeper. And then my enjoyment of role playing him changed. So, I mean, he started off. I was just, again, when we talk about ripping things off with Group, I just ripped off the heavy from Team Fortress. I went with the sort of the deep Russian accent, but that even itself evolved into something different. And yeah, my role playing changed. And I think this is obviously where one of the steps is for trying to engage in role play, is knowing what your voice is. And you don't have to I know we discussed this last time in the last players round. It was about finding the voice, but you don't have to find the voice right away. You just need a voice. I mean, it could be your own. I mean, we had a player in our game, and she would just use her voice. But as she developed, her character then developed a voice. And obviously it doesn't matter in a non-recorded sort of thing where you're not looking for that level of consistency. But you could see that their ability to roleplay changed because suddenly their voice picked up that little growl, or they throw that little bit of emotion in there. And the voice becomes an important thing. And I think when someone really gets into it, when you've had a player who's been like, oh yeah, well I sit there and I go, oh, hey guys, yeah, I'm fine. And then by session 10, they go, hey guys, I'm fine. At that point they're there because they found their voice, and they've kind of gained the courage. And when I think about my first experience with Feng Shui, the thing that really got me involved, the thing that really got me pushed forward and to find the courage to want to role play with everyone else, was someone else pushed me into it. There was we had this guy who was, his life goal was to be the next Brian Blessed, and I think that's where I think it's partially the idea of where Grossworth came from, but he was this really big, large, loud guy, and he took great interest in my character because he wanted to get me involved. He wanted to see what I could do, so he basically constantly asked my character something, and I'm there like, with a character sheet I don't recognize, and in a character that I've not designed myself, but before long, with enough prompts from this guy, I was like, oh, hell with it. And it began. And then with the old 4th edition campaign, I think I went in there a little loud, a little brash, because I'd had a little bit of experience by that point. And I think I then used my character's naivety to turn around and engage other people and try and draw them in to the level I was. I'd find that player who'd be quiet and be like, so how do we open door?
Yeah. I think definitely as soon as you know your character better, that's when or build better characters, that's when you really start being able to engage in roleplay like in an easy, fluid manner where you don't have to think about it too much. You're just there, you're able to respond.
I think, Carl, you touched on a super important point there. As you kind of develop your own personal comfort with role playing, and that level is purely dependent on your comfort, right? Like, it's everyone's personal level. But if you're new, like, you don't necessarily have to hit the ground running. Like, it can seem daunting. Kind of is daunting. Like, and that's fine. Like, if you want to start small and work up, fine. But like for the more experienced players, it's really, really crucial to offer out that hand of encouragement to newer players, or not even necessarily newer players. You know, players that just don't necessarily go to grab the limelight as often. Being able to kind of take that focus and then say, here you go, and pass it off to another player. That will really help kind of build the dynamism and companionship between your group. I mean, Birdie, what's the role play around your table look like?
Differently, very differently, depending on the player.
Okay.
And even within the player, it depends on the character they are playing. So I have more than one campaign running, and in one campaign, each player has 2 characters.
Oh, wow.
I see a major difference depending on how the character has been designed. For example, he has a female barbarian, we already know the girl, and a male dwarf smith. Even though it's the same player, he plays those characters very different. One is more on the rules side of D&D. That's just best possible barbarian, I would say. And the other character is more deep into it. The dwarf has more intentions, more goals in his life he wants to achieve, and therefore he's playing the character very differently. And most of my players are new to D&D. 2 of them are pretty new, and they have to get engaged into roleplay by the other players, as you mentioned them. If you start with role-playing, then the players know how to roleplay and do it in a similar way as you did. So just saying, I talk to the NPC and asking him the way, then your players will do the same. So as a DM, you have to go forward with it, and as an experienced player, you also have to do it.
I think one of the things that experienced players do very well or are much better at, it's actually engaging with other players in their role play. A beginner D&D player will engage with the DM like only, whereas a more experienced player will actually look at their team members and actually go and talk to them. And then you get play-on-play interaction, which is actually something that's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
From like a team perspective, from like a D&D character perspective, having that is something that I think you build over time as a capacity.
It's also nice to see as a DM when your players finally get to that stage where they are having in-game discussions with one another. One of my games, they were all new players, so none of them had the experience. Yeah. But then getting to that point where they started asking each other questions and they weren't breaking character it's a really proud moment as a DM, but it's nice to see that they're helping each other. They've overcome that sort of that fear. They found that comfort with each other. They found the voice in their characters, and they're at that point just ready to run. Like, I don't need to be here anymore as a DM. They can run this story by themselves, and that's nice to see. But it took them a while to get there, and it is those things. If they didn't have that experienced player to engage them, but eventually they found that point by themselves, and that's a nice thing. But yeah, if you are an experienced player and you see that one player who's sitting there, maybe they answer in sort of very basic questions, make sure you're that character's friend. Like, ask that character something in character, not force them to engage, but basically invite them to engage with that question, such as traveling down a road, and just sort of turn around to them and in character be like, you didn't tell me about your mother. Who is your mother? And suddenly that player will be like, okay, well,
there's nothing that player wants more to do than talk about their backstory.
Exactly.
Like every player wants to talk about their backstory. They're just dying for it. So it's not like, don't make the DM responsible for that. Like, you as a player, help the other players unveil their backstory, because they're just dying for it.
This is again where we discussed in the DM's table, where downtime can really come in handy, because again, you can use that to get your players to engage with each other.
I would have a little advice or some rule I have found out for my campaigns. Every time I start a session, we all do this. Somebody of the group, no one wants to do it on their own, has to recap the last session. And I have done this differently. I don't ask the players to recap the session. I ask them to recap the session from the view of their own character. So, like, what's in their mind the last session, and they start to do it in the first-person perspective. That's the rule.
That'd be quite nice. Like, do they use their player character's voice, or do they use their normal voice?
Depends on the player.
No, because I could quite easily see myself using my character's voice to recount the events as if it was like a thought or something.
Yeah, and this really helps out. And I have 3 questions, or 2 questions, if you 3 if you include the recap, that each player has to answer at the beginning of each session.
Okay.
The first question is, how do you feel today? So that the players always know my character is angry, my character is depressed, my character is sad because of something, or joyful, so something like this. And what do you think about the current situation? Are you happy with the current situation? Are you unhappy with the current situation? And it gives my players a good starting condition where they can start within. And
that's actually
if they
really,
do this, I offer them inspiration. That's a little achievement the players can get at the start of each session.
I mean, that's good enough advice, even if your DM kind of doesn't implement that for the group. Just being able to answer those questions yourself is a really good stance. I mean, obviously, the better you know your own character as a player, the better prepared you are for pretending to be that character. And, I'd add that it kind of goes overlooked quite a lot of the time, I feel, but the personality segment on the character sheet of a 5th edition character, like personality, flaws, bonds. I know a fair few players that just don't bother filling it out. But if you know those, and then you can tie them into, the answers similar to what you just posed, that can help influence pretty much all of the answers that you'll need to give as your character for the session ahead. And in fact, there are some games, some other systems that actively reward you, much like your inspiration, but they actively reward you for following your personality directives.
Yeah, there's definitely a few that you gain extra experience if the DM feels you followed them. I think Monster of the Week does that. Monster of the Week lets you, if you follow a particular criteria that you set for your character, you get extra experience at the end of the session.
Yeah, the Powered by the Apocalypse systems are very good for that.
Yeah.
Kind of final point, and this is when you engage in role play, it's also about choosing your scene. And what I mean is, there's an issue where you can be, not participating enough, and there's the opposite effect where you're participating too much, where you get some players that want to be part of every single conversation that's going on, every single interrogation or dialogue. And if you are that type of player or not, you should be kind of picky with which scenes you want to participate in and which ones you want to choose. So I would say we're all participating as a group, so choose your interactions wisely. Decide which scenes you want to take part of, and which scenes you can kind of just step back, because you're not going to be adding anything to it. And that's something, again, with more experience, you become more attuned to, and it just allows other players to thrive.
So basically, you want to sort of find your courage. Because once you find your courage, your voice will come easily to you. It doesn't necessarily be your character voice, but the voice you want to project there at the table. If you're a seasoned player, the best thing you can do is try and find the quieter player. Maybe engage with them in downtime when there's there. Just try and bring them into the forefront. And as Anton said, choose your moment. There may be a point that comes up which, you sit there and think, this would be right. And don't be afraid, because what you may come up with may be the defining moment of your character, maybe the defining moment of your game. It might be the funeral scene that you're doing in front of everyone else at that bar.
Yeah,
but
correct.
Once you get past that first hurdle and you learn how to speak as your character, the rest will be an utter adventure.
Very good advice.
Very, very good advice. And make sure you have fun with it.
Indeed, yeah. Always have fun.
Always fun. Always fun.
Always fun.
One thing I would add to this point is that roleplay is not only voice acting. Roleplay is much more than voice acting. I have heard the advice that you should imagine your character is mute, can't speak. How would you describe the actions? How would you describe his anger, his fear, describing through actions or interacting with the environment? It brings your game more to life, I think, if you have this in mind. How would my character act if he's mute? And then you can pull bottles from the tavern, destroy them on the table, and intimidate an NPC without using your voice.
I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, it's a very important lesson, considering that, the vast majority of the representation of your character is through voice.
Yeah.
Like, naturally, as we do it. So, being able to take a step back and kind of embody your characters another way, fantastic.
Well, that bell, that means the tavern will be closing soon. So enjoy the last of your drinks before you have to leave today. Birdie, do you want to tell people where they can find your Patreon and a little bit about what they can get if they follow you?
My Patreon name is BirdieMaps, and I'm also doing commissions on Fiverr. So if you have something special that needs to be done for a little amount of money, just write me there. And if you want to get an overview of my work, I recommend visiting my Reddit account, BirdieMaps, and the same goes for Instagram.
Sweet.
There you can get free maps and many, many content.
And I believe you've actually prepared something very special for us today. It will be appearing on screen now. It's a map of the Tavern Between Dimensions.
Yep.
Yes. Sweet.
It is very, very good. If we're looking at this right now, it is, again, remarkably well done. So much detail in there.
Yeah.
You know, all the glowing tables and all the foliage around it.
Multiple versions, multiple layers.
Yeah, always. If you support me, you will always get gridded and non-gridded versions. You always get a day version, a night version, and even variants of each map. And I don't know why, but I always have those commission once for city or a tavern, and the next commission from the same guy, please make the tavern destroyed or burning. It happens
yes.
so often. I couldn't count.
Please ruin this. This is too nice. Please ruin it.
Correct.
Well, for you, our viewers and our listeners, we will make this one available down in the link below as graciously given to us by BirdieMaps. Dan and Anton, where can people find you?
I can be found at TBD_Anton on Twitter. I've even posted 2 tweets.
Hey!
Yeah, I know. I've done the thing. So follow me. I will be posting more tweets, hopefully.
Welcome to the 20th century, Anton.
I know. This is the future, I think. Dan, what about you?
So you can find me running the Cormier Echoes of War campaign over on the Explorers of Elsewhere YouTube channel. You can find me over at Twitter over at DMDanT. You can find me at Instagram at DMDMT. You can find me on Reddit at Shire Lovecraft, and you can find me here.
And you can find me at Group Stormbear. That's Group GROOP. That's the same on both Twitter and Instagram. And you can follow us here at the Tavern at Tavern Between. Again, that's exactly the same on Twitter and Instagram. The Tavern is now closing. Please respect our neighbours as you leave. Watch out for a few of the drunken revelers outside. The Dimensions Festival is getting pretty raucous. BirdieMaps, thank you for helping us with service today. You made it much easier.
Thank you for being invited.
You're more than
amazing.
welcome. And
Thank
you
you
will
for
see plenty more of BirdieMaps in the EOE campaign.
You can bet your bottom dollar on it.
I hope so.
Well, thank you for your patronage, all, and we shall see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. We release segments like this from the Tavern Between Dimensions every Friday here on the Explorers of Elsewhere channel. Otherwise, if you want to listen to the episode in full, you can check us out on Spotify and Amazon Music.